Hello, everybody. Eric here to talk about The Tribe by Bri Wood. Is that how you say that? I don't know. This is part of the Paperbacks from Hell line from Valancourt Books, part of my Paperbacks from Hell series. I'm reading through all of the Paperbacks from Hell that Valancourt is printing, putting out, publishing, however you want to say it, in the order that they've come out. I believe I have them in the correct order. And this is number 4, The Tribe. Originally came out in 1981. The original edition had a die-cut cover. Everything was black except for this face here. You didn't see anything else till you opened up the cover, and that was on the inside. I think the best thing for me to do is read the back cover copy. And this is what it says. When the Belzec concentration camp was liberated in 1945, no one could explain how a group of Jewish captives had not only survived but thrived, appearing better fed than their Nazi captors. 35 years later, in New York, the youths responsible for the murder of a rabbi's son are found hideously slain, covered in a strange gray substance. What is the connection between these events? That is the mystery that Rachel Levy and Detective Roger Hawkins must unravel. A mystery that will hold readers spellbound as terrible truths emerge from the nightmare of the past. And then it says this new edition has an introduction by Grady Hendrix. I did not read the introduction till after I'd finished the book, so as to avoid potential spoilers. For the too long didn't watch crowd, I gave this 5 out of 5. I didn't think I was going to as I was reading, but that rating kept going up. I mean, I think it was always kind of sitting at a 4, by the time I got to the end, I'm like, another 5 out of 5. Valancourt is knocking it out of the park with these books. I will say Grady Hendrix says in his introduction that this is the most Jewish horror novel that there is. I think that's how he put it. Let's see. He did mention some others, so I'm hoping I can find it quickly. But it doesn't really matter. But yes, it's a very, very Jewish book. This book, it's hard to describe. It's very well written, and it is very, very Jewish. It is filled with rituals, religious things, day-to-day things of being Jewish in New York in 1981. Characters having survived the concentration camps of World War II. And the horror is a small element of the story. I wanted to, as I was reading it, I kept thinking of things like The World According to Garp, or the book that Simon Birch is based on. I don't think the book is called Simon Birch, is it? Anyway, just sort of these novels that are the day-to-day life of people. And in those books, in Garp, some crazy things happen. But we start out in 1945, Nuremberg, our cold open, as it were, with an officer who's been waiting around for a very specific head of a concentration camp to be found, brought to trial, because he wants to ask him a question. And so that's our opening. Then we jump to, what does it say again? 35 years later to New York. We're introduced to Detective Roger Hawkins, who is a large black man, again, New York, 1981. And his best friend is Adam Levy. I looked online. As far as I could see, Levy, it's pronounced Levy. So that's what I'm going with. But his best friend is Adam Levy. Uh, Adam's father, Jacob Levy, is like a father to Roger Hawkins, and and Adam Levy is the rabbi's son who is murdered very early in the book. So we meet all of these characters and really dig deep into who they are, how they fit into the world, especially the Jewish characters. And eventually we get something horrific that happens. And then we basically kind of move on from there. The book did not go at all the way I expected it to go. And if you want to know what I expected, we can talk about it in the comments below with spoiler warnings and everything. But I even laid it out. I was talking to a guy at work. I was like, hey, this book I'm reading, blah, blah, blah. I think this is what's going to happen. Nope, not at all. So once this sort of horrific thing happens, then we really get into the lives of the Jewish characters, and mainly, excuse me, Rachel Levy. The first section of the book is Roger Hawkins. Second section is Rachel Levy. And it's a lot of day to day. It's her living her life. It's, again, the traditions, the rituals of being Jewish, of living in New York in this time. And it's a long time before the horror element rears its head again. And when it does, I mean, when we get to the horror stuff, it's not extreme. It is shocking and horrific. And so it's a very odd horror novel, especially when I think of Paperbacks from Hell. I think of these over the top, crazy horror stories with gaudy covers, which are the best covers. But I'm learning. I think Grady Hendrix and whomever else has been picking these things out for Valancourt. So far, they've been picking the best of what was coming out at that time, what is considered Paperbacks from Hell. So far, I think The Nest, which is the first one that they did, is the closest to meeting my expectations. It's about killer cockroaches. But then the next two, the one after that, When Darkness Loves Us, definitely I had, not that I had expectations for it because I wasn't familiar with the author or anything, but not what I would have expected if you said, here's a paperback from hell. And then The Reaping, again, not what I would label a paperback from hell. I can see why they are, but not what I expected. And the same can be said for this. It's the reason I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 is because despite the relatively small amount of horror, I still found it compelling reading. I wanted to keep going. I didn't want to put it down. I was staying up later than I should, to keep reading. And then glad I made it to the weekend. It's Saturday. As soon as I got up, I just immediately, well, after, using the bathroom and such, just started reading again. And just finished it earlier today. And it's, not that I've read a lot of Jewish horror, but I can understand why it might be considered the most Jewish horror novel there is. It's really steeped in that, and it's steeped in New York, and it's steeped in the time, which is the one thing that some might consider problematic. There is certain language being used that I don't think would fly today. There's certain language being used that, if used by characters today, would be shorthand for, this is our bad guy. This is our shitty character. And that's not the case here. It's a case of, this is how people talked about certain things back in 1980, 1981. So I think if an author today were to write this story and set it in the 80s, they could get away with using this language, but they might not want to try it. Whereas if it was someone writing today and setting it today, I don't think they could get away with using it the way it's used here, if that makes any sense. But again, I think you have to look at these things for when they were written, who the characters are, what's being said. But there is definitely at least one thing that absolutely would not fly today. Some of the other language that's used is used more specifically for evoking certain things. Like, I'm trying not to give any of this away, but one character mentions, one of the Jewish characters says, we've been called this, we've been called this. Obviously, I'm talking about racial slurs. And so that's different than when a character just casually, let's say, uses one of those racial slurs, and this is one of our good characters. Back then, that may have been a thing. Couldn't get away with it now. I'm sort of harping on this, I think, a little too much. I don't know. But that's something that stood out to me. Not that again, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Just something that jumped out. There's some footnotes, just some of the, I'm guessing it's Yiddish, some of the terms that are used. There's a little asterisk. Look down here at the bottom for the translation. So yes, it's a very interesting story. It's a very compelling story. The horror elements are a small part of the story, but an important part of the story. I mean, that's sort of the driving force behind everything. But it's more character driven, more driven by, again, what it is to be Jewish, what it is to have survived the concentration camps, what it is to be part of. I mean, it's called The Tribe. I don't know if I've ever mentioned that part. And it's, excuse me, it's referring to, in this very specific case, referring to a group of Jewish men who came from a village in Poland, survived a concentration camp together, and have lived together now in New York. And so it's not just the Jews against, well, that sounds bad when I say it like that, the Jewish people necessarily against other people, but these particular men and their families, not against the other Jewish characters, but if it came to it, they would be, it's us. They're a tribe within a greater tribe. And then having a main character who's an African American in the 80s, and he, again, Adam Levy was his best friend, and so he's friends with Adam's wife, now widow, Rachel, but he's a black man, she's a white woman, and a Jewish woman at that. A lot of this relationships between races and men and women in the Jewish community. Just really fascinating stuff. And so not boring, in my opinion, not boring at all, despite not being at all like what I expected from a horror story with essentially the setup that it has. But anyway, that's The Tribe by Bri Wood. 5 out of 5 stars. Another fantastic paperback from hell from Valancourt Books. I do have another book by this author that's somewhere on one of these book carts that I have. I don't remember which, I think I know which cart it is, but I don't remember which book it is. And she's also the author of Twins, which was the basis for the David Cronenberg movie Dead Ringers, um, and some other stuff. She's written other stuff as well, but that's probably going to be the other more well-known book. All right, so recommendations based on this book. And I will say, first of all, I think it's called The Book of Jewish Horror. I think that's just straight up I think it's just The Book of Jewish Horror. You can look it up on Amazon. It is an anthology of horror stories written by Jewish authors featuring and about Jewish things. You might have a diebuck. Diebuck? I think that's how it's pronounced, but I don't know. There might be an accent on it somewhere. Possibly a golem. All sorts of other stuff. Concentration camps. I shouldn't say obviously, but most likely. So the Book of Jewish Horror, an anthology of Jewish horror. Then I would say One Rainy Night by Richard Lehman. Holy cow. I don't know why Richard just jumped out of my head for a second there. One Rainy Night by Richard Lehman. It's the second Richard Lehman book I read. First one that I liked. And it is another tale of revenge with a religious element to it. But it's Richard Lehman, so might not be for everybody, but I really, really liked that book. And then, getting away from any type of horror element, depending on your point of view, I'm just going to throw out Death Wish by Brian Garfield and Death Sentence, the sequel. Of course, most people know Death Wish as the Charles Bronson movie, but it's based on the book by Brian Garfield. It's a fantastic book with some changes or some differences. They made changes in the movie, and then Death Sentence, very different, I think, than Death Wish 2, if I remember correctly. Both books are fantastic. So you've got the Book of Jewish Horror for all your Jewish horror needs. Then you've got One Rainy Night by Richard Lehman for your mystical horror revenge needs. And then you've got Death Wish and Death Sentence by Brian Garfield for your just straight up revenge stories. Those are my recommendations. If you enjoy The Tribe, even if you don't, check those books out. So that's it for this one. The next book on the list is The Spirit by Thomas Page. I'm not looking at the back. I haven't read the back cover copy since this book arrived a few years ago, so I have no idea what it's about, and I'll be digging into it probably in a few weeks. All right, that's all I've got. No questions for these videos. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. We try to be polite here at the on my channel. And please like, share, and subscribe. All the usual YouTube stuff. If you'd care to follow me on other social media, my Twitter is at Ronan5757. My Instagram, where I post pictures of books, comic books, board games, fuzzy animals, is Eric Smith 5757. That's Eric with a K, ERIKSMITH 5757. At Blue Sky, where I barely ever post, I'm at EL Smith. That's all I've got for you this time, so until next time, read more books.